Welcome everyone, and thanks so much for being with us for the Art of Possible Design Thinking for Digital Innovation. I am utterly delighted to say that we have people registered for today's event from the UK and Scotland from around the world, including Toronto, Taiwan and Tel Aviv, and from Dundee to Dubai and Denver. My name's Susie Mitchell and I'm the Programme Director for Glasgow City of Science and Innovation. And Art of Possible is brought to you today by Glasgow City of Science, Innovation and Technology Scotland. And it's a feeder event series for the Can Do Innovation Summit, which is Scotland's national innovation summit, which attracts about 1,000 attendees every year. We have a raft of themed peer-to-peer business-led panels, as well as global thought leaders from the likes of Pixar, NASA and Lego. The summit aims to showcase and support greater business innovation and startups and SMEs. And just a note for your diary, the 2022 summit is being held on the 23rd of February 2022, online and in person. And digital transformation will be a core theme, with ESG and diversity as a driver of innovation as our cross-cutting themes. So we established the Art of Possible series about 5 years ago with the intention of inspiring and supporting greater tech adoption and collaborative innovation to enable business survival, resilience and growth. And it's our belief, I guess, that the most successful businesses will be those that intentionally build inclusive cultures of innovation, including nurturing representative workforces that combine purposeful leadership with the right tech solutions for people, planet and the bottom line. We want to create, really, in Art of Possible, a friendly and informal space, once physical and virtual for now, where the innovation ready and the innovation curious can hear from leaders from the worlds of business, academia, and more, and critically, leaders from a range of sectors who are bold, who are creative, innovative, and collaborative. Today, our expert panel will relay their knowledge and practical insight on design thinking as a powerful tool for enabling digital innovation. And we'll be looking at how-tos as well as navigating potential bumps in the road. So no matter what your sector or business, we hope by the end of the session that you will be inspired to act based on what you hear. And at this juncture, I'd really like to thank our chair and our speakers for contributing to today's event. Thanks also to Stephen and Laura and my team for pulling today's event together. A wee bit of housekeeping before I introduce you to our chair. So we'll be recording today's session, which will be shared after the event online through the candoinnovation.scot website and our social media channels. If you'd rather not be recorded, just make sure your video is turned off. Thank you. Feel free to connect with us online too and share your thoughts and reflections using the hashtag Art of Possible and follow us at Can Do Summit. The format for today will be a short intro and talk from each of our speakers, followed by a moderated discussion before the chair opens up the discussion to the floor. We've already received some really great questions from the audience when you registered, so thanks for those. But use the chat function to send us any questions as they occur to you. So yeah, just submit your questions sort of in there. Indeed, central to Art of Possible is the diversity of our contributors and our attendees, and today's event is no exception. So just so you know who's in the room, the virtual room, we've got academics, engineers, architects, designers, innovation managers, CEOs, curators, and more. And you hail from a variety of sectors, from AI, art, the automotive industry, to fashion, finance, the third sector, education, utilities and health, to name a few. So we've got a great mix of people online to spark some fresh ideas, thoughts and key discussion points throughout the session. Okay, so if you could just make sure, doubly sure that you're on mute for now, that would be great. And it's my absolute pleasure to hand you over to our host, Iain Aitchison. Iain is the founder of Graft, an Edinburgh-based strategic innovation consultancy, which is internationally recognised in the fields of innovation and design management. On a mission to help organisations realise their innovation potential through design over the last 15 years, Iain has consulted to clients from around the world, from multinationals like Bacardi, British Gas, Lenovo, Mars, Samsung, Unilever and Yamaha, to a range of high-growth startups and SMEs. Iain has held senior positions in academia in the Glasgow School of Art, Innovation School, and Northumbria University, and he sat on a variety of boards and sector bodies internationally, including the Design Management Institute in the States and Creative Scotland. Iain, good morning, hello, and over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Susie, and hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Iain, as he said. I'm your host for today. I'm delighted to steer the discussion through the topic that we're going to look at today, which is design thinking for digital innovation. So I'm just going to bring up some slides just to walk us through that. So design thinking, digital innovation, these are two large topics in and of themselves. And in the words of today's event description, we're here today to discuss and explore how design thinking can help startups and SMEs leverage the right technology solutions for people, planet, and the bottom line. So we have a particular focus at Art and the Possible, and we will try and guide the discussion towards that initially before expanding out to your broader perspective in the room today. But first things first, I just wanted to spend a moment just to think about this topic of design thinking. What is it actually all about? So many different definitions, many different ways of thinking about design thinking. It's easy also to think of design thinking as perhaps just another passing business fad, alongside Lean, Agile, Six Sigma, you name it, whatever. But design thinking as an idea has been around for at least half a century, if not more. And to set the scene, I'm just going to give us a quick plotted history of design thinking, just to get us into the zone and think about the sort of questions that throws up for us. So most recently, I think if you look at the last couple of decades in particular, we've seen really the mass adoption and popularity of the idea of design thinking, predominantly in the sort of English-speaking business media through people like Tim Brown and Roger Martin, who brought to the world two similar but distinct definitions of design thinking. So Tim Brown from his consultancy IDEO, thinking really about design thinking as a means to bring the creative process that designers follow to bear to a broader audience of people. So really codifying and defining the design process to make it more accessible to other people. On the other hand, Roger Martin, a Canadian business school professor, he was trying to almost open up the brains of designers and look inside and say, like, how do they think and how do they work, and how is that distinct to that of other disciplines and professions. And to him, design thinking in a business context is really about the way that designers reason their way through the world. And what he observed by studying designers is that they are really good at working with impartial information, of generating productive hypotheses in the world, of visualizing their ideas and making them tangible. And that allows them to take on a unique role within organizations and to propose the future, not only analyze your way to it. So two kind of distinct visions there in the last sort of 10 or 15 years, which have gained popularity and traction through their work. But stepping back kind of, 10 years before that, American academic Richard Buchanan really set out the sort of terrain for Martin and Brown to pursue when he mapped out what he called the 4 orders of design thinking, which was really a challenge to the
Sorry, Iain, to interrupt, but you went on mute.
Oh, thanks, Stephen. Not sure what happened there. Where did you lose me? So more recent, so taking a step back from that, Buchanan really set out the terrain for designers as a challenge to think about their own discipline and move beyond thinking about design as an output, be it a product, a service, or a piece of graphic design, to design as a way of thinking and strategizing about complex problems. So in this sort of framework that Buchanan put out, design became a subject of management. When you start to think about strategy development as a design process, or organizational design as a design process or activity, then it starts to become a management issue or a leadership issue for an organization. And taking kind of one sort of chapter back even further out to the 60s and 70s, Herbert Simon, American psychologist and economist, took this to really its ultimate conclusion, 30 years before these other people, and said, basically everyone is a designer who makes choices to bring into play preferable solutions to existing situations. And so I'm not here really to give you a history lesson on design today, but really to extract some of the questions that design thinking poses, and which I think our panel will pick up on today. Is design thinking a process that you can really define and teach people how to practice, or is it more of a mindset that you kind of need to embody and behave in that respect. What different types of challenge can you apply design thinking to, from SMEs to large organizations? Is it just about products and services? Is it about how organizations are run and conceive of themselves? And lastly, is design thinking for everyone, or is it for a chosen few? These are the kind of common topics I think that we often hear around the debate of design thinking. So to help us explore these questions and the real world work of design thinking for digital innovation, I'm really delighted to introduce our expert panel today. And for what I know will be a stimulating session, we're going to have a 5-minute or so intro from each of our panelists to their work and how that relates to the topic today. So first up, just to introduce Morgan, leads design, experience and innovation in LEGO's Creative Play Lab, which is based out of Edinburgh, or he's based out of Edinburgh, I should say. Dr. Jen Ballie is research manager at V&A Dundee. Jen's responsible for developing the core research content at the cutting edge of design research in the V&A Dundee, which is now Scotland's National Design Centre, not only its National Design Museum. And Elaine Baxter, director at Boutique Innovation. Elaine is an innovation specialist who's passionate about bringing physical and digital innovation to life. And prior to founding her current consultancy, Elaine established and ran the first innovation accelerator programs at Procter & Gamble's luxury division and other brands too. So with that introduction, I'm going to hand out over to Jen for the first of our panel share outs. Jen, over to you.
Thank you, Iain. Hello, everyone.
I should just say, while we're going through the presentations, please feel to pop any questions you have for Jen, Morgan and Elaine into the chat box, and we'll curate a selection of those at the end as we come together again.
Thank you, Iain. Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Jen Ballie. I'm research manager for the Design for Business programme at V&A Dundee. We're a design-led support programme with the remit of supporting SMEs across Scotland to use design thinking to address their most pressing problems. And we do this through workshops, through training, to bring the broadest set of design skills to companies, councils and social enterprises across the country. Our recent work has included supporting local authority foster care teams to recruit more carers during the pandemic when children are in need of support and respite, through to programme with Mitchell and Scotland Innovation Park, working with businesses in sustainable mobility and decarbonisation that are looking to invest in Dundee and bring new jobs to the city. We see design as one of our greatest strengths and national assets to innovating in response to people, place and planet, and also as we look ahead to some of our most pressing challenges in a post-COVID future. In today's business landscape, we're surrounded by complex problems, and it's really important to say up front that design thinking is not a panacea. There isn't a magic sauce or a secret ingredient, but it can be a really powerful tool to diversify and to explore how you might rethink operations, support business transformation internally or externally to break into new markets. So a recent example of this, we've worked with lots of different companies. One of our very first accelerators almost over 3 years ago now was our colleague Pete, a senior engineer at world-beating polymer firm W.L. Gore. And he saw real benefits across his business after a problem-solving mindset was disrupted. He said that it's really reopened his eyes and re-energized some of his thoughts around problem-solving. Now, Pete's in charge of a team working on high-frequency electronic assemblies that work in really harsh environments. And he's a design engineer from a team that wanted to find new ways to improve a product's existing performance. And through embracing design thinking and this toolbox of new ways of working, they've gone on to readdress how they respond to customer problems. And he says the standout for him is that it's all about people. It's about working with people and no longer working in isolation. Now, he's aware that throwing design thinking, and this comes up a lot in our programme at minor issues, can deter colleagues as you have to carefully choose your use of it. If we're always reaching for the post-its and Sharpies, sometimes eyes do begin to roll, but it's also very action oriented and you really do need to roll up your sleeves and get it done. So there's a mixture of theory within there, a lot of the great reference points that Iain mentioned in his introduction, but it's also about practice and having the skills and the confidence to embrace those tools to work through that. Over 2 years of starting to work with design thinking and embedding it within the culture of his organisation, our colleague at Gore fed back that it started to refresh their thinking, and it's not only had an impact on design engineers and the rest of the team, but also on more customer-facing associates, whether they're technically minded or whether they're in sales. A way of this working has started to improve the workplace, but also starting to identify skills gaps in organisations and perhaps identifying new roles. So they've since added design thinking techniques within job descriptions for their new engineers, and this has had a really positive impact on the way they innovate. So to kind of think about design thinking, it's about a new way of doing things, but it's also important to consider the barriers and often see that it's hard to see beyond them. So from a design thinking perspective, we often use the phrase, how might we? And we craft statements in that way as a primer to innovation to explore what might be possible today, tomorrow, and way far into the future. But another helpful phrase is what would have to be true. So these prompts allow us to work through ambiguity and push against constraints when working collaboratively. So it's a process that you can't do alone. And thinking about business resilience within tech and innovation, it's about rethinking leadership too. So looking at innovation and emerging technologies can be a real source of differentiation to offer you competitive advantage, but it's also about being comfortable with ambiguity. We get an awful lot of projects coming through our programme that are fuzzy or foggy, and we have to work through the design-led process to unpack them so there's no clear linear trajectory, and sometimes that can feel a little bit uncomfortable. And then just to wrap up, there's a lot of, with our transition online using Mural and Miro, there's a huge amount of resources available to have a go. And I guess our programme's more from a curatorial perspective, that we're not reinventing the wheel. We've almost reached peak method within the design thinking landscape, but there's an awful lot of free resources available that can allow you to have a go and to build up that confidence by doing. So that's just a quick overview of who I am and what we do within our programme. I'll hand back over to Iain and the other panellists.
Thank you, Jen, for that insight into your work. I think that WL Gore example really brought to life the potential at the intersection of technology and design, helping things you mentioned, impacting the customer experience, helping people to see things from that perspective, choosing the right challenge to work on in the first place, and then helping people navigate, the ambiguity of an innovation process. So I'm sure we'll return to some of those topics later in our discussions. So thank you, Jen, once again. And so second up, I'm going to invite Elaine onto the spotlight, as it were, to share her work and perspective on this topic as well.
Thanks, Iain, and to the GCOSY team as well for inviting me along this morning to be part of the panel, which is fantastic. So my name is Elaine Baxter. I guess by background, I am a scientist. I've got a PhD in chemistry, and for many years I worked in the product design area for Procter & Gamble, Gillette and Coty and other big consumer goods organizations. But for the last 4 years, I've been managing my own business, Boutique Innovation. And I utilize a combination of human-centered design or design thinking and innovation acceleration techniques to help clients work and think and do differently. I'm lucky because as a design thinking practitioner, I get to work with clients from across all sectors. And over the last 4 years, I've worked in FMCG, I've worked in healthcare, worked in pharma, utilities, energy, construction, drinks, publishing, education, and I've done a lot of work in L&D and then for third sector organizations as well. So I've really worked across the board with many different types of people. And then within those organizations themselves, I've worked with everyone from people working in R&D right through to marketing, finance and leadership roles, because of the fact that, the design thinking as a capability, as a tool, is really, agnostic in terms of the people or the organizations that you're working with. So I engage with all company sizes, but in terms of SMEs, I'm often drawn in at various different points in the innovation cycle. Obviously, I love to be engaged at the start, but that's not always possible. Most SMEs are looking to deliver a better, more customer-centric proposition when they ask me to come and work with them, but most of them don't know where to start. And so I think the beauty of design thinking is that it provides a framework for SMEs to work towards to solve their overall design challenge. In terms of a recent project that I've done that would be relevant to this platform today, I've worked with a client who I can't name, but whose business model is around data sharing, and they want to better understand how different digital propositions might help their customers and their clients. And so together with that client, we conducted significant amounts of field research, collected an enormous amount of quantitative and qualitative data, and spent most of our time in this field research phase interviewing end users or customers to understand their needs, their wants, their desired outcomes. And we wanted to study really what the pains of the system that they were using today versus the potential gains and desired outcomes for their clients and customers were. The next stage of the process that we went through together was, ideation and prototyping, and then testing with end users. And this testing has taken many forms. And in the digital realm, you're lucky because it's easy to mock up wireframes and simple executions that are testable in basic platforms, and that doesn't have to be expensive. And all early stage prototyping should really be like this, cheap, quick, and easy to do. So the outcomes that this client have experienced or has experienced over the past few months is really better customer-centric solutions, many of them unexpected. And internally within their own organization, I would say that one of the best outcomes for them has been the internal innovation building capability that they have gone through, with many of their teams now working in this way, using design thinking as a framework to help them in their innovation. And these early adopter groups, which we started to work with first off, have now grown. And so there are more people within the organization using these methodologies. I think in terms of challenges working in design thinking, some of these can be internal, really bringing the team along with you in your way of thinking, getting your management aligned, finding the right internal sponsor for the work, finding the funding to do the proper field research to understand user needs. These things often seem really difficult to do, but for those organizations who I've worked with and organizations that I know who approach the problem that they're trying to approach holistically, then they really are engaging in some long game thinking, which reaps the rewards for them in the end. I'd like to talk very briefly about how design thinking can be used not just for product or proposition or service development, but also for strategy development. And Iain touched a little bit on this in his introduction. So over the last couple of years, I've helped several teams to utilize design thinking to help them to come up with digital strategies. And we've used these internally in organizations, for example, Crack, which provides research intelligence and innovation services to those people who support career development, so largely academics and researchers. And also the Centre for Digital Built Britain, which is a partnership between the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy and the University of Cambridge to understand how construction and infrastructure could use digital approach to better design, build, operate and integrate in the built environment. And in both cases, for both these organizations, we've used design thinking to help them to come up with their, develop their digital strategies for the future. In terms of practical advice to kind of wrap up here, I would say design thinking is a framework that can guide your thinking. However, I wouldn't get caught up in the process. It should be a guide, but not a straitjacket. And that's what I always tell the clients that I work with. I think there are numerous resources out there that can be fantastic for people that are free, and in particular IDEO and IBM, who have some really great free resources, both for learning and for utilizing, which you will find online, and I can happily share the links in the chat box afterwards as well. And I would say design thinking is absolutely for everyone. It's a holistic methodology that works in so many cases. And I think with a small amount of coaching and engaging in it, you can become a practitioner with a bit of practice, and it's a fantastic way of working, thinking and doing. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Iain, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Elaine. That was great, and really interesting to hear your experience across sectors and industries there. And I hang on to that phrase at the end. It's a framework, not a straitjacket. Applying that, I think, as you mentioned, the outcome ultimately building capability, not just applying a process as a one-off event. So yeah, lots of things to pick up there again. So thank you for that food for thought, Elaine. And last but not least, we're going to hear from Morgan about your experience at the Lego Creative Play Lab.
Thanks, Iain. Thanks a lot. And thanks also for the opportunity to be here today. I've actually just moved back to Scotland thanks to digital innovation. I've been living in Denmark for 10 years, but yeah, there's no Edinburgh office, unfortunately, right now. There's just really me. But yeah, incredible that, you know, in the times we live in, you know, we can kind of work, you know, across countries. You know, no surprise, Lego is primarily a physical toy company. That's still a good 80% of what we do, but we do make a lot of digital games and experiences. That's obviously where a lot of kids are these days, and increasingly we make a lot more digital physical experiences, be they kind of robotics or STEM stuff or more entertainment based, where I've been working and spending a lot of my time. And I've led a few big digital transformation projects, Lego Dimensions, which was a partnership between Lego and Warner Bros. Interactive. It was kind of a video gaming digital physical experience, and most recently Lego Video, which is a kind of an AR digital physical music video making experience in partnership with Universal Music. I think design thinking is just pretty embedded within Lego culture, specifically in Creative Play Lab where I work, and that's kind of, you know, for want of a better word, our kind of innovation lab where the kind of more radical, you know, kind of innovation happens. I think digitalization, you know, for Lego really is about staying relevant in the world that kids are growing up in today, and that means really translating our physical play values that we've worked so long on, translating them into a digital space and doing so in a way that tries to stay ahead of the competition. And I think design thinking is really key to that, you know, for us to be able to kind of go out and explore and find new insights, you know, turn them into kind of some form of reality and, you know, and get buy-in from the wider company to move forward with them. But very much echo, you know, what the other speakers have been saying about, you know, being flexible with that. I wouldn't say there are any sort of, you know, corporate kind of buzzwords really that we hang on to. We're constantly riffing on that theme of design thinking, you know, almost on a project-to-project basis. I think in terms of a process though, you know, broadly speaking, all of our projects ultimately need to define how digital can add value to the physical experience of Lego bricks or to the audience of Lego fans. You know, some more radical projects might take a step further back, you know, and begin by exploring, you know, the core play needs of children and how we might address them in a particular context, be that technology or otherwise. But sooner or later, that question of value really becomes key. And I think this is where design thinking, you know, really comes into its own. You know, what we, you know, do regardless of what particular process, you know, the team wants to work with is, you know, that we, I think that the core tenet of design thinking really is that you know, you prototype quickly and as cheaply as you can. And that's a really accessible thing. And I think that's where the majority of the learning happens. So in the case of digital innovation, a lot of that is just PowerPoint, fake-a-types, you know, fake videos of experiences, fake landing pages, quick and dirty prototypes, even just Photoshop mock-ups of prototypes. And what we're really asking is, you know, if this existed, you know, would it have value? Or in our case, does it look fun? That's the key question for kids. And I think from there, you know, just really practically, you can start to begin to invest more time and money and resources with a bit of confidence. Right? Or if it completely falls flat, you know, you haven't lost a lot. You can just reloop and go and try again. I think the biggest barriers are actually further down the line. Can you actually deliver technically on your value proposition, and can you actually communicate it, you know, when you really go to manufacture, when you really try and go to market? But that's also something design thinking can kind of help you with. In terms of, you know, kind of the improvements I think this has led to, I kind of really echo, you know, what the last speaker was saying. You know, I think design thinking does try to demystify design a little bit. You know, it is, at the end of the day, it's a very rational process based on trial and error. You know, it's the way we've kind of really, to be honest, made things for centuries. I think the trick is trying to get a group to behave in that way, and some sort of framework is what's really made that powerful. And I think for me personally, I think what's been really transformational, I think, is just like how that's grown outside of design, how that's been democratized through the whole business. And that really helps build a really coherent project and a really coherent mission within a company, bringing in lots of different stakeholders who otherwise would maybe felt a bit alienated by design speak. You know, you're getting that input really early on, you're building buy-in, you're kind of getting all the people on the journey who really have a valid voice on whether this thing's going to come to life or not. So I think it's a great tool just for cooperation. Just, you know, any practical kind of learnings I'll just finish up on. I think broadly speaking, you know, digital in my experience has really meant hardware or software, and they've got very different challenges. But I think, you know, that the broad framework of design thinking, prototyping early, you know, being agile and iterative, you know, has really, you know, come into its own in both areas. Hardware, I think it's all about running experiments to define that minimum spec that you can live with for launch and beyond that, before you hit that enormously expensive big manufacturer button. Your challenge is making sure that your experience is not going to fall flat if performance isn't what you hope for, or if costs creep above what your market can afford. So a lot of really, really valid, you know, prototyping and experimenting to make sure that you've got the right spec. Software, on the other hand, for me has really been a challenge, is much more about usability and about meeting consumer expectations across just a wide range of platforms. People are increasingly impatient with slow or buggy or confusing digital experiences, and you really need that broad experience in the team to be able to meet those expectations, which are set by companies, you know, larger than Lego, let's be honest. So I think it's just, you know, in conclusion, I think it's, you know, it's a really versatile framework. It doesn't have to be dogmatic, and I think at the end of the day, it's really just about having a research mindset, asking the right questions for each phase of the project. Are you exploring? Are you trying to validate, you know, whether you've got something before you invest more time and effort and money into it? But a really, really powerful tool that I think, yeah, we can all get something out of.
Thank you very much, Morgan. That was great, and I suppose a unique insight to Lego, which is an inherently creative company in its inception, which gives you maybe a different set of design thinking challenges, as you described, like transitioning that ethos into a different situation rather than, you know, trying to convince people that creativity has value in the first place. So I think that's the really interesting dynamic to explore. So great. Well, I think thank you all for your introductions and the different contexts. I think we've got a snapshot of, you know, quite a diverse range of situations there, from the sort of engineering-led transition into being customer-focused to the you know, various experiences from Elaine across different contexts, and from you, Morgan, within the Lego group. So I'd like to first of all just bring us back together around a few of the themes that I've kind of bubbled up from the conversation there to explore some questions, and then we'll take some questions from the audience, both the pre-submitted ones and some which are popping up in the chat box as we've been going through. So first up, I'd like to focus on this idea of, I think you all mentioned it in your own way, of building capability and seeing change for the long term. So, you know, if design thinking is a process, it's a set of rational problem solving steps, as you mentioned, Morgan, or it's a framework, not a straitjacket. How do you see the challenge of embedding that as a kind of cultural change or a capability within an organization, and what are some of the pitfalls to avoid on that journey? So if I could open that up to the panel. So the challenge of capability and culture building around design thinking.
I can maybe kick off. I mean, I think a key thing is just to make sure it has support from the top. You know, I think any kind of R&D type process or activity, I would really recommend that you don't try it out on a fringe issue. I think you know, the first speaker talked to that a little bit as well. You know, not bringing out the post-its and the Sharpies to kind of you know smaller problems. I think you know, I'd really, you know, you should really be using it on your biggest business challenge, and it really needs to be supported, because otherwise I think you're setting yourself up for a little bit of a challenge. R&D labs particularly, I mean, I know that's a big company thing, but if they exist as a kind of like innovation sideshow, as they're often called, they really struggle to kind of sell the results in, because the core business, you know, is really still thinking about what it's really good at, ultimately, and it's, you know, you don't want to have to do that. I think, you know, you really want to actually use design thinking as a transformational tool, I think, to take the whole business on a journey if you can.
I can add there, Iain, if that's okay. But
yeah, go for it.
I agree with what Morgan's just said. Absolutely critical to have senior sponsorship of the project that you are going to use design thinking for from the off, really, if that's possible. I think having a ring-fenced budget to protect the projects that are being run by design thinking, so that you know that you are going to be able to go right the way through from that field research phase into some prototyping and testing at the end. I agree with Morgan about you don't want it to be the sideshow. However, the one thing I would say is if you are struggling with kind of internal pull, then having an early adopter team who can try it out for size first and then showcase the success of that can be a really good way of kicking things off. And when I did this, both for Procter & Gamble and for Coty, we did it in this way. It worked really well, where we started with a small team of early adopters. You know, then they create these positive case studies and experiences for people, which other people then want to be part of and want to get involved in. So I think that can be a great way of growing culture rather than forcing it on people when they see that others are leading by example and creating some great case studies.
Yeah, so having that tangible evidence to point out of success. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Elaine. Jen, did you want to come in on that one as well?
Thanks, Iain. Yeah, just to echo the points of the other panelists, I think when we offer our training in the accelerator part of our programme, strategically we onboard people in pairs, teams of 2, and we also try and ensure that there's someone at director or senior level in that pair, so that when they go back to the organisation, that can really help drive forward the project and take it forward. And I think another observation over our programme is perhaps thinking about leadership in a different way, it being less hierarchical and really empowering small teams to be nimble and giving them the support to really run with these ideas, and also having exemplar projects. So sometimes the big ambition might be a bigger 5-year plan, but if you've got an exemplar that demonstrates the wider values, sometimes that gets buy-in and bigger support more incrementally too.
Yeah. That's I'm just picking up on that last point, Jen. I wonder if, from my sort of experience in reading of design thinking, to a certain extent, could say it's symptomatic of an underlying issue, which is that the sort of 20th century model of organizing business and thinking about innovation is based on kind of division of labor and specialization. And you have R&D departments, you have technology teams, you have marketing teams, and I wonder, are we seeing, you know, across the panel in your experience, maybe in the SME landscape, a different way of thinking about innovation in smaller companies now that uses design thinking to sort of almost not fall into the pitfalls that maybe the larger organizations are now trying to unpick?
I think it's from different ends of the perspective. Maybe a startup or a younger organization can be a bit braver because they've got a bit more flexibility. They'll have different challenges because they'll also have the pressure of the day-to-day running of the operations, and they might be firefighting, so time might be an issue. But those smaller organizations can be a bit more radical and flexible in their structure. But I think we're also seeing kind of senior leadership being much more open-minded to be less hierarchical and really build up teams to allow that to be driven in the bottom-up way, and to really invest in training so that their teams have got new tools or new techniques. But I think it's about breaking it down into little building blocks to make it manageable. Because those foggy projects that are a bit ambiguous, they are hard to explain. And I think sometimes design thinking does get a bad reputation of the hundreds of sticky notes on a wall, but how do you prioritize them? And what's going to make money? What's going to hit the right market? So yeah, I think there is a shift in leadership coming through.
Any other panelists want to pick that one up?
I completely agree. I think increasingly, you know, even in the time I've been at Lego, I think there used to be a culture of, you know, kind of the bigwigs setting the strategic direction, and that all cascading down into projects that were quite, kind of waterfall led, and they would set the kind of the areas of exploration, and then the design teams would go off and, kind of do their thing. And I think increasingly there's been kind of much more of a bottom-up approach, and I think that design thinking has helped that framework. It's not just some crazy, unoverviewable kind of idea bank, but there is a methodology and a sort of a way of presenting ideas that design thinking gives, that allows lots of people to explore, kind of the problem areas and bring in all of those stakeholders, so that, that the ideas that are being explored have kind of really sound business roots, or are well researched, or that collaborative nature, I think, of that design thinking offers, allows for bottom-up innovation a lot more, I think.
Yeah. Right, so this is almost kind of modeling that way of doing things. It's sort of showing what's possible by doing things in a different way.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So maybe switching to another topic, just picking up on something that you mentioned, Morgan. I think you touched on this as well, Elaine, is the sort of prototyping or getting things out quickly, and that being one of the powers of design thinking. But you also mentioned, Morgan, there's the sort of challenge of when you hit the sort of, it's easy to get the sort of Wizard of Oz prototype out there, PowerPoint that looks and feels good, but then you move into the world of like production capabilities and money and stuff like that. And how do you, what tips have you got for integrating feasibility and viability at the beginning of the design thinking process, not just desirability? So I think in the design thinking conversation, a lot of emphasis goes on the customer focus. How do you get things to actually integrate and move along the process as well later down the line? So I just wonder if any tips that you might share on that for people.
I think what you mentioned, that I think that, if I'm right in thinking, that was another ideal framework, the desirability, feasibility, viability, that that really holds true. And I think just in a way we've come to, not in a conscious way, but we're almost like a little kind of startup innovator within a big organization. Projects, if they want more money to move forward, you kind of need to, at each stage of the game, show that you have addressed, all of those factors, not just desirability. It often starts there, but not always. And I think, within any organization, I think it's just asking yourself that question, like, are we going to put more time and effort into this? Do we, is there something we're missing here? And I think that's just what you do with your own money. Again, it's just to be really rational about it. You really want to push yourself to say, have we got all of the viewpoints in here? And I think, again, that's why it's so good that design thinking has, kind of left a lot of the design kind of vocabulary behind. But there's not a big difference between something like the business model canvas and design thinking. It's just kind of speaking to a different audience and maybe helping you explore commercial viability through a value proposition, as opposed to, just meeting user needs.
Yeah. Thanks, Morgan.
Add as well that I think it's important at the start of any design thinking process to define your hard points and define what space you're going to play in. So, accepting that you're going to explore around these boundaries, but saying, we won't develop in this area, we're not going to spend this much money, it's got to come in this region, whatever it is. But if you start out with a series of hard points at the start and recognize that will then determine the space that you play in ultimately, that can help you to make sure that you're not just addressing, like you say, the user need, but also whether or not it's viable, feasible, ethically sound, and all the rest of it.
Okay, thanks, Elaine. You're just picking up a couple of comments from the audience in terms of the where we think about design thinking being applied. So we've focused so far on you could say the sort of market facing customer sort of angle of things. You've mentioned, I think, Morgan, and you mentioned with the kind of the fact you're in Edinburgh, Elaine, with the fact that there's now a whole resource set of tools available, or just how you're working with people. What opportunities has design thinking opened up in our current situation of remote working and collaboration to actually think about the internal workings of organizations and how they think about their processes and ways of doing things, or the culture, for example? Have you got any sort of tips and tricks on how design thinking can be applied for kind of internal digital innovation, not only, you know, sort of the external piece.
So I think design thinking is an extremely efficient way of working because it focuses you down on, you know, addressing the kind of critical problem that it is you're trying to solve, be that internal or external. And with, you know, the number of, you know, I guess digital tools that are available to us now in order to work remotely and collaboratively, and I'm sure I don't need to create that list for anyone on this call, that allows people to, I guess, really focus down on what's critical to them at any given time. And so I think, in a funny way, the pandemic has forced us all to be a bit more choosy about how we use our resources. And in doing so, it allows us to, I guess, be more focused on what it is the endpoints we're getting out. So I think absolutely I've seen people work on internal change over the last year in a way that they would certainly not have done. And I've anecdotally heard incredible stories about how people have compressed project timelines and all of that. You know, but certainly using design thinking, like I say, is this framework that allows you to go through from your concept to solution in a very short period of time is a very efficient way of doing it.
Yeah, I'd add, yeah, I agree. There's so many tools, but I mean, I'm just going to pick up on one since we all mentioned it. But Mural, I think it's kind of funny, and I mean, you know, it's been around a while, and of course, it's just digital post-it notes. But I think in the pandemic, it actually did become really critical, actually, because not that I'd say we ever really had that style of management where we were heavily sort of directive and trying to keep on top of people and kind of giving them daily tasks or anything like that. But I think Mural has, you know, with everyone being remote, like, how do you keep the kind of mindset of the team? How's the team still kind of keeping active on these problems? I think, you know, that's sort of maybe kind of broken down the resistance to, people are quite fond of their little marker pens and their post-it notes and the nice little pictures they make. And I think I've certainly got over that now after moaning about digital post-it notes for long enough. The idea that it's permanent and actionable and sort of asynchronous, that there's the mural board, there's the thinking, and we're all sort of collaboratively just refining that vision and iterating on it, and it doesn't just hang about on a wall until all the post-its fall off and get forgotten and someone's got to type it up into a PowerPoint. I think that muscle that's maybe been trained a bit by the pandemic of, you know, of collective iteration, you know, has been quite a cathartic one, I think.
Yeah, so it's maybe forced it in a way that it wasn't necessary before, so it was easy to kind of leave it in the room with the post-its dropping off, as you said.
I think designers particularly were very getting attached to their post-it notes and were very resistant to that could also be probably digitized and sort of made more efficient. But
good point there, which is it kind of democratizes the ideation piece as well. So, you know, in that scenario, introverts and extroverts are able to contribute in the same way. People who feel like they can't draw or aren't creative, you know, all these things that you hear in these sessions, it's open to everyone. And so it certainly broadens probably the contributor space in these sessions as well, which is another implicit benefit that it's driven, you know?
Yeah, that's really true. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. Brainstorming used to always have this quick, fast and very extrovert mindset. And then I know quite a while ago, we started doing more silent brainstorms because you were really only getting one type of thinking, and, you know, everyone get hooked on a funny idea and then off the project would veer after, you know, basically just a little kind of, you know, bit of wordplay. I think, yeah, you're right. There's more sort of careful consideration and, you know, more transparency that's going on with these things now as well.
Yeah, great. And I wonder if that speaks to another almost implicit outcome of design thinking, which is making complexity and thinking visual and tangible so that it's able to be returned to, which was the case previously, but now we have this maybe more of an asynchronous way of working, which actually the benefits of that become more to the fore because we have a way of harnessing it maybe that we didn't in the future. So great. So I'm going to just we've got just under 10 minutes left. So I'm going to give the audience the due and return to some of the questions that have been posed, both advanced and the sidebar at the moment. One kind of topic that's come up is just going to pull this out from the chat boxes about education and the idea of incorporating design thinking in education in earlier years in school, and to what extent you've experienced, working with people of maybe a younger age group and the benefits of that kind of then later on. So I wonder if there's any thoughts from the panel on that topic.
Within the museum, we have a young people's collective who are aged between 16 and 24, and they are such a brilliant force of kind of vetting ideas and going out into the community and testing them and working with different groups. But also within early years, I think they don't have the kind of, there's no blockages in creativity. They're so open-minded and quite honest. And there's that optimism, but also thinking really blue sky. And I think we should nurture that a little bit more, because I think when we do our training, and I guess the other panelists might see, in a brainstorming session, it takes a little bit of time to warm people up, and there's different activities to really get into that. But maybe we should nurture that a little bit more, especially with some of the big problems like climate change, where young people are really taking an active role in driving forward change. There's lots of simple tools that could be built into the curriculum that could play a really great role in giving them more agency in that, I think.
Yeah, it's funny enough, it's not an area I've thought a lot about, which is kind of embarrassing since we are all about children. I suppose Lego in many ways is always been an iterative problem solving tool, but I think it's a really interesting idea. You're right, like that one thing it's been very hard to sell just in a box of bricks, is a process, a creative, we have a booklet that shows you how to build something, but that's very different from trying to teach open-ended creativity. But that's something obviously like we're starting to explore more and more now with digital physical experiences. That's definitely a passion of mine. That's something I suppose what I think could be really interesting, and I think the key challenge with design thinking, as we've sort of talked about, everything else is really just tools and processes, but it's the mindset of asking yourself really, what is the problem? That's maybe the only bit that's kind of an art. And sometimes with children, that's maybe something they could really learn. They're normally very happy with whatever they create, and their creativity sort of goes in all directions. But I think design thinking is really, at its best, it's about actually spending a bit more time trying to think about what it is you're actually trying to solve, and really coming back to that several times, which I think would be a great skill for, particularly for kids trying to figure out what they're trying to do with the rest of their life. I know I found that really hard. Where was all this leading? What do I really want? Yeah.
I would say, not to get off topic, but I find the biggest problem that I have when I go into a new client's office is that they don't understand the problem they're trying to solve themselves. And I think you've really brought that out there, Morgan, that oftentimes people just bring someone from the outside in to help them to define their problem. And actually, if the problem was well defined, they might even be able to address it themselves, but most of the time they haven't even defined the problem properly. So I think certainly you're right, going back in that virtuous cycle and helping people to understand how to define problems properly to start, so that they can ultimately create a solution for them, would be a really great place to start.
Yeah. So sort of, in a sense, holding on to and inculcating that sense of curiosity to even ask, like, what is the problem here? Which is something that maybe we kind of lose the sort of naivety or the new person's benefit of being able to ask the seemingly dumb questions.
I think as humans, we're really, for whatever reason, we're really drawn to solutions. We love to, it's particularly in group dynamics, it makes a group feel like they're moving forward when they've gone from talking about problems, which are kind of scary and uncomfortable, and people don't like people that create problems or talk too much about problems. We all want to get on the solution train. So I think, again, design thinking and a lot of these tools that we've been talking about just make it a bit more comfortable. I think you were saying at the beginning, Jen, just, being comfortable with that ambiguity and just recognizing that that's time really well spent, because you don't want to spend a year on the wrong solution to the wrong problem. But, if we can, get better at, spending time on the problem space, and it's the same tools and it's the same way of thinking, but yeah,
that's great. Thank you, Morgan. And yeah, one other question or a sort of theme of questions which has come in both beforehand and now as well, is the role of sort of data and technology in the design thinking process. So we've historically maybe thought of like going out and speaking to people, or doing some desk research. What about things like big data or artificial intelligence or machine learning, or some of these other kind of buzzwords. So I'm sure every corporation has their research program into. But how do we kind of get more and better insight into the design thinking process through some of these technologies? I just wondered if you'd had any experience collectively of that, because it seems to be a question that's popped up in the chat and in the pre-submissions.
I think all of these things are useful, and all data points that you build into your field research process help to add value in the overall proposition design. I think being able to kind of marry that with absolutely keeping the user front and center of what you're trying to do at the end, and making sure that the insights that you're deriving from these pieces of data are consistent then with what you're hearing on a qualitative level. That's the critical thing for me, but absolutely they all have a role to play and are valuable in that process.
Yeah, I'm working a little bit with this for the first time myself, actually, at the moment. We're, developing, kind of an app that's very live. I think what traditionally design has been prone to do is to kind of build fictitious personas, and kind of sort of that's very relatable. That's, again, something that we're very good at, is just thinking, empathizing with, kind of the idea of the user, and maybe subdividing that into a few. But after it becomes, more than 5 or 6 personas, our brains can't really cope with that. Like, designing for the macroorganism that is society is really complicated. But it's kind of necessary when you start moving into some areas of digital service design. Just no matter what you think your audience is, they're all doing very different things, and I think the data gives you some kind of feedback loop to be able to try and address those issues, whether they're usability or whatever. But yeah, as Elaine says, it's really important to actually correlate what you're seeing in the data with. You do eventually need to understand why people are behaving like that if you want to kind of fix anything. So yeah, it's not an area I've worked with a lot, but I can definitely see that's like a really big future topic, and you need analysts. You just can't open up these data files yourself and make any sense of them. So it's a fascinating area, and I look forward to working more in it.
Thanks, Morgan. And just one final question from the audience, which is really practical one, but I think a good one to end up on is, going out of this session today, going back into your organisation, what got any really kind of practical tips for people involved in the facilitation of a design thinking process? What's your kind of top three do's or don'ts, or really things you think you should encourage people to do as sort of practical approaches?
I think sometimes there's a lot of ambiguity and it's hard to be a champion for the process. So I think continue to be that optimist and see the bigger picture when it does feel a bit fuzzy or impossible. It's really practical, and I think the best way to get people on board is to give them that experience, so it's quite immersive and they can see value through working through that process, and break it down into little building blocks. So having a really structured process to go through the problem first to make sure it's defined in the right way, and then the second space to really test and vet the solution before there's big investment. So little steps, but overall, try and be as optimistic as you can when sometimes it feels impossible.
Okay, great, and thanks, Jen. I think that's a great sort of up note to end on. So I think I'm going to pass back over to Susie in a second, but I'd like to just extend my wholehearted thanks to Jen, Morgan, and Elaine for both your preparation, contribution, and discussion today. So thank you very much. It's been I'm sure we could have kept going for another 2 hours on this topic. So thanks very much for your time. And I'm going to hand back over to Susie now, who's going to bring things to a close.
Okay, thanks very much, Iain. Thanks for chairing today's session. To all of our speakers for such a stimulating hour on the potential of design thinking for impactful innovation. It was really great. Thanks to all of you for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time out to be with us today, and we hope you enjoyed the session, and that, importantly for us, that it's offered practical insight. So I noticed there's quite a few brilliant resources, actually really helpful resources posted in the chat. So we can share those on our social media channels after the event as well. And also obviously the link to the recording of today's event. So you can kind of follow us, Can Do Innovation Summit on Twitter and LinkedIn for those. And we'll also be publishing details of the next Art of Possible event, which will be happening around the same time as Scotland's FinTech Festival. So that's the power of FinTech to innovate business operations and to support business growth and resilience. So before we head off, we've got a super quick poll. It'd be great if you could give today's event a little rating, if you could, out of 5, 5 being fabulous, 1 being less fabulous. If you have any other feedback or comments, just post them in the chat in the next sort of couple of minutes. And if there's any other topics you want us to cover, let us know. And finally, yeah, thank you. And for such an insightful and wide-ranging discussion, and thanks for all your comments. It's been really stimulating. Thanks a lot and have a good day.